Giants fans woke up yesterday expecting Carlos Correa to be introduced as the new face of the franchise to his 13-year, $350 million deal. A couple hours before the press conference, an email sent out by the Giants to the media that the press conference had been postponed, and by the end of the day, right around bedtime, Carlos Correa to the New York Mets. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? What went on? What the heck happened? And what do the Giants do now next?
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes, actually right now 3 days a week for now in off-season mode, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Maybe. Anyway, coming up on today's show, Carlos Correa, disaster has struck. Embarrassment, humiliation, unmitigated disaster. It just could not possibly be worse right now for the Giants on the day they were supposed to introduce Carlos Correa. Literally less than 3 hours before fans are expecting. I'm getting questions on Twitter like, is it going to be televised? What number is he going to wear? It's all about to happen, and then disaster strikes. And it's like we're living in the Twilight Zone, and the very worst version of the Twilight Zone. It is just unbelievable what transpired yesterday. Basically what happened, in case you didn't know, Carlos Correa is not going to be a San Francisco Giant. Carlos Correa is in an agreement with the New York Mets, pending a physical, which is, those golden words that are always really important, but almost never come into play with these types of deals. I mean, we've been operating under the assumption for a week that this deal was going to get done, but the Giants never officially announced it. It was always pending a physical, and essentially what we're hearing and what part of what makes this so frustrating is we're probably never going to get the full story because you can't just talk openly about a player's private medical history. What happened was the Giants were not, there was something that they flagged during his physical, and his physical, by all indications, was on Monday in San Francisco. And so the holdup was they were waiting for tests. That's the first report we got. And then by the end of the day, he's a New York Met. So what the heck happened in between? Well, we've got some reports this morning that from Susan Slusser of the San Francisco Chronicle. She says that she says, quote, Scott Boras tells me that after the Giants canceled their press conference yesterday, they indicated they still wanted to negotiate about Correa, but Scott Boras, didn't hear anything more from them. 12 hours later, the Mets deal got worked out. Slusser continues, it sounds as if there was a very old Correa injury pre-MLB that was raised as a potential issue. It has not cropped up again. None of Correa's other physical issues have required medical intervention or ongoing treatment. Slusser continues, if this was a true medical concern, it sounds a little tenuous. And if it was a matter of cold feet, that's usually ownership, not the front office. We won't know what happened from their viewpoint unless or until the Giants discuss this, if they do. And more reporting, we've got Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic giving basically statements from Scott Boras, which is what Slusser was going off to. So Scott Boras said to Ken Rosenthal in The Athletic, quote, we reached an agreement. We had a letter of agreement. We gave them a time frame to execute it. They advised us they still had questions. They still wanted to talk to other people, other doctors, go through it. I said, look, I've given you a reasonable time. We need to move forward on this. Give me a time frame. If you're not going to execute, I need to talk with other teams. Every team has a right to go through things and evaluate things. The key is we gave them the Giants, medical reports at the time, they still wanted to sign the player and negotiate with the player. So this just basically couldn't sound worse for the San Francisco Giants. But let's just give you the statement that was released a little bit afterwards from the Giants, and it's a statement from Farhan Zaidi, says the Giants. Quote, while we are prohibited from disclosing confidential medical information, as Scott Boras stated publicly, there was a difference of opinion over the results of Carlos's physical examination. We wish Carlos the best. We wish him the best. What about the fans? What do you wish for the fans? Because they have just completely... Look, I just must say, if they truly believe there was something this serious about his medical history, and what the statement is saying is that it was the results of the physical examination, not it was something that they gave, that Scott Boras gave to the Giants prior to the negotiation period. And the fact that Slusser is saying they didn't communicate with Carlos Correa after the canceled or postponed, well, now it is canceled press conference, tells me it was that concerning that they possibly just wanted to back out from the deal. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be saying and assuming that this means they didn't want him at all in the first place, which I just think is kind of crazy to imagine, because this backlash is going to be extreme. I can't imagine they recover from this anytime soon. People are not happy. And that's the understatement of all understatements. And so this is not like some kind of favorable scenario for them to like say, they knew it was going to be reported that they had agreed to terms with Carlos Correa, and then to be hours before a scheduled press conference and to call it off. They're not just doing this to like act like they wanted to sign a player and then back out. At least that's my opinion. I think that's the rational opinion. To me, it seems like they were legitimately scared off by something that they saw when they got their hands on him in a physical examination, and they wanted to do more tests. And saying it was something pre his MLB days, who the heck knows? I'm not a doctor, and even if you are a doctor, you have no idea, because they're not giving you any concrete information. So the end result is that the Giants did not get Carlos Correa, and at this point in the offseason, between the time that they signed Carlos Correa and now, it was a week, essentially. It was last Tuesday night that news broke that they had signed Correa, and it was yesterday, Tuesday night, that news breaks that he's going to the New York Mets. And between that period of time, over the span of about a week, all the best remaining players signed elsewhere. Carlos Rodon is gone. He's on the New York Yankees, which, by the way, salt in the wound, Aaron Judge and Carlos Rodon officially announced by the Yankees today. Ugh. And then Dansby Swanson, who could have been a okay fallback option for the Giants, very durable player. I'm sure there wouldn't have been issues with his medicals. He signs with the Chicago Cubs during this week, and I don't remember exactly when every single player signed, and I don't have it written down in front of me, but what I do know is that there are no more impact free agents. And so all of a sudden, when you don't get Correa, that's it. You've lost your opportunity to add this impact talent through free agency this offseason, which, how do you sell that to the fans? And not just how do you sell that, but how do you recover from the heartbreak is not strong enough of a word. The Giants fans have been jerked around this offseason like nothing I've ever seen before in my life from a baseball perspective. I have never seen anything of this magnitude in my life from a baseball perspective as to what the Giants fans have endured. And the fact that we're not going to get much information, probably, I'm sure there's an incentive from the Giants, if they really felt like something was wrong, to maybe leak something. It's a PR disaster. It is a PR disaster. But again, rationally speaking, from my perspective, I do believe they had just legitimate concerns. And the only way we're going to know if they were right or not is by waiting 12 years. And so, look, if Carlos Correa ends up missing a bunch of time in 2023, has serious issues, then it could kind of change the narrative a little bit. But as it stands right now, looking at the 2023 Giants, they just got a heck of a lot worse. And now with Rodon gone and their signings simply being what they are, then it's hard to see them being better than last year's team. While I think last year's team underperformed a little bit, Carlos Correa was a guy who could add 6 or so wins to your team. And so sets them back quite a bit when they were already kind of a fringe contender, even with Correa. So coming up in just a minute, more about this. And at some point, probably in just a second, we're going to discuss what can they even do at this point and why trades are like an attractive option, but also not an attractive option for a specific reason. So we'll get into all of that and more reaction to this in just a second. But first, BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and World Cup. We've got it all at BetOnline. They had us. They had the Giants as favorites for a while for Aaron Judge. They had the Giants for a while as favorites for Carlos Correa. And at various points, we thought the Giants signed both of those guys. But if you didn't pick the Giants, you're happy. Man, I don't know what they even do. It seemed like the payout was coming for those who took a bet on Carlos Correa to the Giants. But who knows? I mean, maybe the Mets deal even falls through because it is pending a physical. But, odds on free agent destinations, football, basketball, whatever it is, you can find it at BetOnline. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, as promised, more reaction to this. I just genuinely feel bad for you, the fan. I have never in my life seen a fan base get jerked around like the San Francisco Giants fans have this offseason. And really, it's a long time coming with the wait for a superstar addition, and you think you're getting one in Aaron Judge, that gets ripped away from you. You think for a whole week you're getting one in Carlos Correa, and that gets ripped away from you. It's just absolutely brutal, and I don't know how they expect their fans to stay loyal to this team. Like, they're going to lose people from this, and I'm sure a lot of you listening are just fed up, and I'm fed up. Thank you, by the way, for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day, or at least 3 days a week for now. We are in off-season mode. If something warrants it, we may do more than 3, but 3 days a week is somewhat what to expect until pitchers and catchers report. If they even decide to show up this year, the Giants might just say, you know what, we're not showing up because we're going to get booed off the field every day. Make sure to check out Locked On Sports today. I'm sure we're going to appear on there for this. The biggest stories around the sports world in 20 minutes or less, plus instant reactions, game recaps, and Locked On's take of the day. Locked On Sports today, available on YouTube and wherever you get podcasts. My head is spinning. I couldn't sleep. I made the sad, turns out to be mistake of checking Twitter one more time yesterday, seeing if there was any updates about a resolution on Correa to the Giants, because it seemed to me that there was obviously an issue, but that the most likely situation was that he was going to end up working something out with the Giants. That is almost always what happens in these situations. It is very unusual for a deal like this to fall through. In fact, I don't think it's ever happened where a deal of this magnitude gets reported and then it falls through. Usually if there's an issue with the physical, they maybe renegotiate the terms. And it's worth mentioning, Carlos Correa ends up getting less money and fewer years with the New York Mets. Now, it's not much fewer years. It's 12 years, $315, as opposed to 13 years, $350. And so to me, that suggests, I said it at the time before we had any of these comments about the physicals and all that it suggests to me that there was a medical issue. Certainly now we do know the Giants viewed this as there was a medical issue, but the New York Mets getting him for significantly less money tells you, once again, it tells you that these offers the Giants are making are strong. That's why they're being accepted. Like the offer the Giants made to Aaron Judge is what he took back to the Yankees, and they matched and they got him. If you've heard, the Padres offered $400 million, that's false. They were reportedly maybe going to, but they didn't. They didn't actually make him an offer. So I just am trying to set that straight. I'm not trying to just like sugarcoat this at all, because they're making these offers, but clearly in Correa's case, I mean, only time will tell if this was a smart decision at all. And it could take a while. This could be something they had concerns about as he, enters his early to mid 30s, but maybe it's going to be fine for a couple years, but then something breaks down. We don't know, and we're never going to know. And if they thought that this was a possibility, that he was going to have lingering medical issues, then they shouldn't have tried to sign him in the first place. And Pete Patella is their new Giants general manager, and he was with Correa for his entire career in Houston. So he probably had insight into this medical stuff that happened before he reached the big leagues. And so I have no idea what happened here. I really don't think just they never intended to sign him makes any sense at all. But it's just a disaster. And like I said, I felt sick. I was in shock. Like I had shock waves going through my body. And I couldn't sleep because it was just a swirl of negativity. And I'm sure that a lot of Giants fans are feeling the same thing. And that's not what sports is supposed to make us feel like. And so how can they possibly salvage the offseason? There's no salvaging it from this point. Like there's still moves that they could make that are solid additions. But suddenly, as we've discussed numerous times, the moves of bringing back Jock Peterson, signing Mitch Haniger, bringing in Ross Stripling and Sean Manaea, those were all fine and solid moves to one extent or another, but Carlos Correa is what brought them all together. But if you take out Carlos Correa, then it's not enough. And you lose Carlos Rodon and you replace them with Sean Manaea, who had a terrible year in San Diego, and Ross Stripling, who was good last year, but is like, it's a deeper rotation, but it has far less upside, although you can project Kyle Harrison into the 2023 rotation, and I think they are. And so I think the rotation could be fine and perhaps even good. But on the position player side, that's like all they've done at this point now is they've re-signed Jock Peterson and brought in Mitch Haniger. So that doesn't address the defensive issues they've had. I guess, like, in a sense, you're taking Peterson out of the outfield by adding Haniger. They still need an outfielder. Like, even with Correa, they wanted another outfielder. Ideally, a good defensive center fielder, but maybe a good defensive corner guy, and then you just have Yastrzemski and Slater in center, which could be okay with Haniger in maybe left, which is an easier corner than right at Oracle Park. The starting rotation is pretty full, so I don't see them doing much there, and bullpen and maybe an upgrade at catcher, and I guess the infield, right? They obviously wanted an infielder, but who else is even left in free agency? It's not a good-looking list. In terms of Steamer projections, which is a projection system featured on Fangraphs, the best players by 2023 projections in terms of wins above replacement, best player is Gene Segura, who is just is like kind of the definition of mediocre. I actually kind of like Gene Segura as a player. He's a good defender at second base and kind of a scrappy throwback type at the plate. Not a guy who hits for a ton of power, but a guy who hits the ball all over the field, is kind of a double-digit homer and steal threat, although he is going to turn 33 in March, and so I would expect that speed to continue to decline. And then you've got Thairo Estrada already. To me, Gene Segura is kind of similar in some ways to Thairo Estrada. Man, he runs some really low strikeout rates in his career. Strikeout rate 13.8%. So I like Gene Segura, but he's not a needle mover like Carlos Correa at all. The projection, by the way, is a pretty healthy 2.5 Fangraphs wins above replacement. Correa's projection, according to Steamer, was about 5 wins above replacement. So, like, if you just kind of get the emotional side of it out of the way, which I don't think you need to, I'm just saying if you were able to, like, objectively think about this, in terms of what this is saying, the difference between a Gene Segura and a Carlos Correa is only about 2.5 wins. And so projections are not necessarily fact. They're just a guess as to what's going to happen. And Correa has the upside at any moment in any season to go out and put out an 8-win season, and Segura is kind of capped at much, much lower than that because he doesn't have that same kind of upside. But the problem is the positional fit, because if you were to sign Gene Segura and put him at second base, what do you do with Estrada? They have said they could see Estrada being a super utility guy. Perhaps you put him in the outfield, but to me, I'm not convinced he's going to be a good defensive outfielder. And then you've got a questionable defensive outfielder in left, perhaps in Estrada, a decent, perhaps, defender in Haniger in right, and then decent center field defense out of Yaz and Slater. It's just not a great fit. And then what do you do at third base? So suddenly they, like, because if you had Correa, it's Crawford going to third was the plan from what we've heard. But, I mean, now Crawford slots back in at short, and suddenly third base is wide open. And so you could say, okay, we'll sign a third baseman, but there just aren't many. And if you look at Evan Longoria is arguably the best remaining kind of overall third baseman in this market. So can you imagine if they decide, okay, yeah, we're going to run it back with Evan Longoria and Brandon Belt, lose Carlos Rodon, replace him with a couple of decent starting pitchers. Ross Stripling was really good, but there's just no spinning this in a positive way unless they really dodged a bullet with Carlos Correa's health, and we just won't know for quite a while. So as it stands right now, it just looks like the only way that they can get meaningfully better going into 2023. Look, they could sign like a bunch of quality guys and some bullpen arms, but for me, the only way to get like meaningfully better is to make trades at this point. So maybe you've been thinking that this whole time I've been chatting here, and the problem with trades, as we said all offseason long, is that they had money to spend. And with a trade, the price you pay is talent. Whereas with signings, the price you pay is cash. So if you make a trade, you're losing something from talent in addition. So coming up in just a minute, we're going to get into some of the trades the Giants could make, and they might have to do it because if they just go into the season with this team, people aren't going to show up and they probably won't make the postseason. And so what can they possibly do from here? We'll get into it in just a minute. But before we do, did you know that driving high is considered driving under the influence? That's right. Driving under the influence of marijuana is against the law in every state, even in the states where marijuana is legal. That means driving high could get you a DUI. And if you think law enforcement officers can't tell when you're driving high, you're wrong. Your friends can tell, your coworkers can tell, even your parents can tell. Everyone can tell. So what makes you think that law enforcement officers don't know when you're driving high? Driving under the influence of marijuana can slow your response time and change how you perceive time and speed. So even if you think you're fine to drive when you're high, you're not. Because the bottom line is, if you feel different, you drive different. And driving high is driving under the influence. So remember, drive high, get a DUI, paid for by NHTSA. All right, as promised, man, I just feel bad for the fans here more than anything, because people were out here wanting to buy Christmas presents for their loved ones, Carlos Correa jerseys, asking me what number he was going to wear. And instead, you get a big old pile of nothing after all the anticipation that you were getting something. If there's one takeaway from this, that is it for me, is that the damage caused by this offseason to Giants fans is going to reverberate for years to come. And basically, the only way that I can see this turning around is if they start to have some success with players from their own minor league system debuting and making a real impact. Because if you think about it, you look at the 2010, 12, 14 World Series winning teams, the total core of that team was homegrown talent. Buster Posey, Tim Lincecum, Madison Bumgarner, Matt Cain, Pablo Sandoval. They made some moves in between, like trading for Hunter Pence, but he wasn't there in 2010. And I don't know. I mean, the Barry Zito signing, it's not like that was a good signing in general. He had certainly some great moments in a certain postseason, but those teams, and part of what made them so endearing was that those guys, they're when they're young and they come up through your system and they become stars before your eyes, that's always great. And so I think that's ultimately at this point what it's going to have to take, and they're going to have that success. And if some of these guys, like say Kyle Harrison, has an injury or something, not trying to put that into the universe, but he is expected to make an impact in 2023. You've got Casey Schmidt, perhaps going to make an impact in 2023. You've got other young players coming up through the system. I think that the farm system stinks narrative is overblown. A lot of the people who cover the Giants farm system agree. It's a little bit overblown. I think we're maybe looking at the MLB pipeline rankings too literally. Look, was Logan Webb ever a top prospect? He was not. And so prospect rankings, take them with a grain of salt. And you've got some upper tier prospects in the likes of Kyle Harrison and still Marco Luciano, even though he's had setbacks with back issues. So that's where this whole trade conversation becomes really problematic, because if they want to make themselves like a obvious playoff team, which was their stated goal going into the offseason, was that we want to be a team that we look at in spring training and say, this is a playoff team, no doubt. Right now, that's not the case. They're not like a 90 loss team in my opinion, but they're maybe around where they were at the end of 2022. Like, you lose Rodon, but you add a couple of solid, perhaps starters, and you add Mitch Haniger. Maybe you're close-ish to the talent level you had at the end of last season, which was a brutal year, boring team that wasn't fun to watch and didn't make the playoffs and just barely finished at 500. And so there are some guys out there. Like, I've started to, before this Correa situation, I compiled a list of some possible trade candidates. Rafael Devers stands out as a possible fit if the Red Sox fail to extend him. He is a guy entering his last year of team control, and the Red Sox are in a weird situation similar to the Giants. They're kind of half in, half out, I would say. And if they can't extend Devers, they really should entertain trading him. But they're also going through PR nightmares. I would say the Giants are now in a worse spot from a PR perspective. But so if Devers is available as a one-year rental, he makes some sense. And I've had people ask, do they have what it takes to get Devers? 100%. This is not the same type of situation as Juan Soto, because Soto had 2.5 years, 3 postseason runs worth of team control left. When a player only has one and Devers is not as good as Soto, then yes, you have the pieces to acquire Devers. But the question is, what would it take? And then if you're drastically subtracting from your farm system, that hurts exactly what I'm saying, which is that their future depends on that. And so they're in a terrible position here. But I don't know what they're going to do. They might have to try anyway. And maybe you go get like an Ahmed Rosario who wouldn't cost as much and is a one-year player, meaning 1 year from free agency. Hasn't been a great defender. I like him in a lot of ways, but the defense hasn't been great, and so that's a problem. Shohei Ohtani, they're not going to trade him. After all the moves the Angels have made, like kind of mid-level players to surround their superstar talent, it tells me they're not going to trade Shohei Ohtani, which they've said they won't. But he could become available at the deadline, and he's going to be a free agent at the end of the year. Continuing to look through, Ramon Laureano makes some sense for the San Francisco Giants at this point. The catchers in Toronto make some sense, like Danny Jansen, Alejandro Kirk, Gabriel Moreno. The Diamondbacks outfielders, Jake McCarthy, Alec Thomas. You've got Willy Adames. Would the Brewers entertain moving him? You've got Brian Reynolds, of course, of the Pirates. And then some Cardinals players. I like Tyler O'Neill and Dylan Carlson and Lars Nootbaar and Nolan Gorman. So there are some guys, but the problem is you're subtracting from your farm system. So anyway, what they do for the rest of the offseason, I'm fascinated to see it, but I don't blame you if you just are like kind of done with this team at this point. But at the same time, my ultimate takeaway is that there probably was a reason for this. They really didn't like what they saw with Carlos Correa's medicals, would be my guess. I think that's the rational viewpoint of this. if you want to go conspiracy theory, like they never intended to sign him, I just think about it. Why would they do something that was going to have such a disastrous blowback? Like, I think this is worse than just not getting him in the first place. And you could have just not signed him and pivoted to someone more, like Dansby Swanson, and it would have been like, it's not Correa, it's not great, but it's at least something. So in this case, they don't get anything. And if they just don't have a good team and flop again, then how is that a good outcome for them? So this is a nightmare outcome for them, for you, and just it's like we're living in some sort of reality where we're cursed. Where the 3 championships in 5 years it upset the baseball gods, and now we're forced to live in this nightmarish Giants reality. It's really how I feel today. And so anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked on Giants your first listen today. Now make your second listen today. Locked on Sports today. Peter Bukowski brings you the biggest stories from around the sports world in 20 minutes. Get the analysis and opinions before anyone else with our local and national experts and insiders. Locked on Sports today podcast available on YouTube and wherever you get podcasts. I can't wait to see what they say about this whole situation. I'll probably make an appearance on there, so check it out. Anyway, once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like the show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. Even if you don't like the news, you can like the show. So anyway, check me out there. Thanks again for listening. One more episode this week. It's going to be tomorrow. So we'll have more reaction. Maybe we'll do a mailbag, get to some of your questions, because I can't wait to see what those would be. Anyway, thanks again for listening. You are now Locked on Giants.